Violence against women is a public health issue with a pervasive global prevalence. In New Zealand, it is a significant health burden on the well-being of the society. The World Health Organization defines violence against women as a gender-based crime that incurs physical, sexual, or mental harm on a woman in either a private or public sphere. The violence women experience can manifest into short-term and long-term health effects. Violence against women is a current social issue in New Zealand. In fact, 1 in 3 women in New Zealand will experience violence at least once in their lifetime. New Zealand has the highest prevalence of sexual violence of any other OECD nation. Aligned with global evidence, Indigenous women in New Zealand disproportionately experience violence compared to European women. In 2016, women reported over 26,000 incidents of domestic violence to the police, only accounting for 20% of cases actually reported. Additionally, 73,000 women called the Women's Refuge Crisis Line, and 9,000 women accessed their services. In 2018, the Labour government allocated $2 million to a newly established government body tasked with mitigating the violence against women issue in New Zealand. Additionally, they passed the Domestic Violence Victims Protection Bill, which increased legal protection in the workplace for victims of domestic violence. In 2016, New Zealand lost $894 million in productivity costs due to victims of violence. This figure is expected to project to $3.7 billion over the next 10 years. Costs fall under 3 categories: direct costs, indirect costs, and intangible costs. Direct costs include the medical assistance needed to treat victims' physical injuries and psychological symptoms. As well, it involves external agencies such as the police, child social services, and lawyers. Research shows victims of violence have diminished earning potential and lower workforce participation. As such, they negatively contribute to a society's economy. These consequences can be seen as indirect costs of violence. And finally, intangible cost refers to the victim's pain, suffering, and fear, which are difficult to place an economic value on, however, must be considered in the financial impact of violence on women. Violence against women creates negative social impacts on society. For example, women commonly adopt addictions to cope with violence, which negatively affects their health. As well, in 2016, studies showed 50% of women in New Zealand became homeless in an effort to escape a violent relationship. And finally, violence against women has generational effects. In 2016, New Zealand police investigated over 120,000 cases of family violence, of which 34% of children were endangered during a domestic violence incident. Global evidence states children raised in violent homes are more likely to be arrested, develop addictions, and perpetuate violence onto others as a learned behavior from childhood. For the aforementioned reasons, my first proposal to the Ministry of Health is to train staff. Health providers encounter a large majority of the consequences of violence, such as unplanned pregnancies, injury, and illness. However, the majority of health providers in New Zealand are untrained in detecting and responding to gender-based violence. I recommend the Ministry of Health develop clinical guidelines for health professionals to detect and respond to gender-based violence. This must include the identification of emotional or mental abuse the patient may be suffering from. Family violence is estimated to cost the country between $4.1 and $7 billion each year. Currently, the Ministry of Health categorizes violence against women and child abuse into one category: family violence. Although these two issues are interrelated, the majority of initiatives undertaken to mitigate family violence have addressed child abuse rather than violence against women. I recommend the Ministry of Health separately categorize violence against women to child abuse in health data and research dissemination. This will best depict the extent of this issue to society and aid the development of initiatives that appropriately target violence against women independently. Victims of violence commonly rely on NGOs for social support and shelter. As such, NGOs are knowledge experts on the violence against women issue in New Zealand. In my final proposal, I recommend NGOs be consulted when developing health policies for this issue in order to best represent the voices of the victims.